Hi everyone, it's Ren here. Happy Tuesday, guys. Delighted to see you today. And before I embark on the topic of this video, I just want to remind you that I have a book out on the INFJ type, the ecstatic soul. Now, this is the most in-depth, systematic, and deep study of the INFJ ever written. This is not humble, but this is my claim, so you can make up your mind by reading it. All the links to the paperback and ebook versions are in the description box down below. So if you want to get it, less than $10, please go for it. In a couple of days, I'll be making a video presenting the book in my hands, but it's already available. The book cover looks great. People are really enjoying it so far, so I recommend you get it. Now, in terms of this particular video, I want to talk about the 5 worst jobs for INFJ. Now, I could be making a video where I arbitrarily tell you what I think are the 5 worst jobs for INFJs, but this is not something that I want to do like this anyway, because anybody can do this, and I am an INFJ myself, so I ought to use a little bit of introverted thinking. And the way in which I'm going to use introverted thinking is by suggesting the following. My dad is an ENFJ, and he is the head of an important department in the French civil service, okay? He's an important civil servant in Marseille specifically, and he operates with his own system of personalities, right? He doesn't really know about MBTI much, but he uses a system, a grid, that is, if you like, it is typically usable from the perspective of managing employees. So it's a grid of personality that specifically targets the personality at work. What are your inclinations and orientations at work? And these orientations are divided into 4 main types. One is the supporter, the second is the controller, the third is the promoter, and the fourth is the analyst. And essentially the supporter, as the name indicates, finds fulfillment in supporting others primarily. The controller finds fulfillment in managing projects and making sure tasks are reached. That's the controller, so typical STJ correspondence, I think, in this case. The promoter is usually extrovert, finds fulfillment in promoting causes, pushing for new ideas, convincing people, getting people on board for new ideas and new things. And the analyst is someone who likes to have his own time, he gets stressed out if too much pressure is put on him or her, including time pressure, like short deadlines, likes to work with content, likes to be able to express his creativity, okay? So a typical example of a good analyst job would be researcher, for instance. All right, so we have these 4. And now I just want to add one last element, which is that for any job whatsoever, for any position you're going to be in, even a position you like, you're always going to have to make sacrifices. There are always going to be aspects of your work that you don't particularly like, tasks that you don't enjoy, that you don't find fulfilling, but you do them nonetheless because they are part of your job, they are part of your position, and you don't really have a choice, okay? So in this case, my dad's system suggests that anyone is going to be, when they're not liking the task, but they have to do it anyway, in a mode that is called adaptive submissive. Adaptive submissive. You adapt to the task and you submit to the fact that it's not your typical orientation, it's not what you like, but you have to do it anyway. And the idea, and now we're going to move on to jobs that are the worst for INFJs, is that a job will be fulfilling and enjoyable and satisfying to the extent that it doesn't put you in an adaptive submissive mode too often. Let's say less than 20% or 30% of the time. That would be a good equation, okay? So now let's move on to the 5 worst jobs for INFJ. And this is informally ranked from least bad to worst, okay? So the first one that I want to talk about is working in an administration, working for a bureaucracy. So let's say a government administration. I think this is actually quite a bad job for INFJs. The reason being that, first of all, it is very sensing oriented most of the time, although you will find intuitives there working in communication departments, for example, but by and large, it's a sensing oriented. There's not a lot of room for creativity. And there's a predominance of controlling types. Controlling, supporting types. So you're going to find yourself in positions where you're going to have to adopt a controlling, supporting behavior most of the time. Now, it is my claim, and you're going to let me know if you think I'm correct, that an INFJs, by virtue of their type, by virtue of the fact they're anti-dominance with FE and TI, are predominantly going to belong to the analyst category. And if I were to add, if I were to create a hybrid type for the INFJ, I would say that there will be either analyst supporters, maybe for the more Enneagram 2, 1 and 2 subtypes of INFJ. And so pure analysts would be maybe type 5 or 6 INFJs. And then maybe to some extent analyst promoter, maybe for type 4 INFJs, for instance, maybe for type 9s. Okay, although type 9 INFJs could be more in the analyst supporter category. Nevertheless, a predominance of the analyst. You're not going to find this a lot in administration. So I think you're going to be in an adaptive submissive mode most of the time. You're going to be pressured to follow the orders of a controlling type, most likely. So I advise that you don't go for it. This will be a restriction on your potential, and it cannot make you satisfied. Now, the second job that I want to use as an example type of job is politics. I think politics is actually, it looks good on paper, but I don't think it would be a great job for INFJs. Now, of course, in politics, you have more room for creativity to an extent, and there will be a mix of sensing and intuition in the types that you'll find in politics. However, it's a very high pressure job. It is a job where extroverts are going to do better, where a lot of superficial, manipulative socializing is going to be involved. Manipulative, not in the sense necessarily of being an unhealthy narcissist, but because the socializing is always with an ulterior motive in mind that is quite clearly defined along a party line, for example. So I think this is going to be quite unsatisfying to INFJs. Also, for all these reasons, you're going to find mostly promoter controllers in politics and people that do well. Promoter because they're able to advocate for their positions and their ideas. So highly extroverted kind of orientation, and controller, especially if they're in a party and they have to manage the affairs of a party. So INFJs usually really don't vibe with the controlling aspect, and only rarely with the promoter aspect. So I think it would be very pressure inducing for the INFJ. It would make them stressed out and not corresponding to their existential makeup. So I don't think that would be good for them. Thirdly, I would say that being an entrepreneur is actually paradoxically not necessarily a good approach for the INFJ. Now, I want to distinguish between, being a business owner where you have your own business and you're almost like a consultant, or, you're a freelancer, or either an actual freelancer or someone who has a business, but in whose situation they act as a freelancer of sorts, where the analyst proclivities can still be exploited and they can sell their services to different specific other businesses or administrations. But in the case of an entrepreneur, well, again, the promoter aspect is going to be very developed and very demanding. The pressure is going to be enormous, and the controller aspect is going to be even more pronounced than the promoter aspect. Not a lot of room for analysts, not a lot of room for supporter in this instance. So I really doubt that the INFJ will manage not to get really burnt out by a situation, and more importantly, would they really find it that interesting because of the promoter and controller orientations of this kind of job? I don't think so. So I don't recommend you do this, despite the fact that I have seen YouTube videos where it is claimed that this would be a good job for INFJs because they're good with people. They don't understand that INFJs are intensively good with people, not extensively. They like one-to-one relationships or one-to-two relationships where depth can be explored. They don't like extensive, numerous relationships where shallowness is the norm. Goal-oriented shallowness. That's not for INFJs. Now, next job on the list would be in marketing and sales. Now, the reason should be obvious. It's a kind of job where extroverts are going to find what they like, and it's kind of job where promoters are going to really dominate, where there's going to be shallowness of relationships, a little bit like in politics. It's true that there will be a creative element, and you'll find both N and S types in marketing and sales. It's not necessarily only an S-oriented type of profession, unlike what I hear sometimes in terms of the stereotypes. But I just don't think that INFJs are going to be finding satisfaction in this promoter-oriented kind of role where the analyst aspect is almost completely non-existent. If you're too much of an analyst, you're going to need time, you're going to reflect a lot, this will impact your sales in a negative sense. So very bad for INFJs. And finally, I want to mention what I think could be arguably the worst possible jobs for INFJs, and that is in the domain of what I would call accounting writ large, accounting in general. God, I can only imagine how terribly unsatisfying, depressing being an accountant would be for an INFJ. The only redeeming aspect is that it can facilitate an introverted personality rather well. But being an accountant is all about being a controller. It's all about making sure that, you know, everything fits, that targets are met. It's all about making sure that numbers match. Very little room for creativity, very little room for proper subjective oriented analysis. It's all about being, you know, a rule oriented type of guy, or type of girl. You know, it's going to be a very STJ oriented kind of job. I cannot imagine any situation in which an INFJ would find fulfillment in this. So although it can offer the attraction of facilitating introversion, maybe a good wage, maybe job security, consider the fact that it could make you very existentially unfulfilled. So I would recommend that you don't go for it, but it's only my opinion and I don't want to prescribe anything for you guys. So these were my 5 jobs that I think INFJs should avoid and could drive them crazy. Thank you for listening. Give me a like if you enjoyed the video, consider subscribing, and be aware that the Discord link to our new Discord server will be provided very soon. See you guys, enjoy your Tuesday.